Hi everyone, again, I'm Roshni, and this is Stefan. I'm a manager of technical product management at Amazon, and I have done over like 80 interviews for Amazon. I've been in a lot of loops. I've also done over 20 interviews myself for product interviews, so I've made mistakes that I'm happy to share as well. And today we're going to go over what are the best ways to answer the design a product question, which can be super nerve-wracking for people who are not so good at it. And believe me, I was one of those people who's not so good at it. Even now, I think I'm probably above average at best. There's some people who are just naturally really good at it, but it just comes with a lot of practice. Stefan, do you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, I'll just do a quick intro. So I'm Stefan. I'm a senior product manager at Adobe, specifically with the Lightroom team. If you all are familiar with the photography org and Adobe's photography products.
And the thing about Stefan is that he's one of the best people that I've seen at responding to these designer product questions. He's actually gone through the rounds at Google and is part of like the team matching process and everything. So like, he's just phenomenal at it. So I'm excited to have him role play what a good response looks like, whereas I'm going to do the bad response just based off of my own experience. Before we do that, I just wanted to quickly walk through what are the steps to responding to a design a product question or improving a product type of question. The first thing is you should never start designing a product when you get asked this question. You should first scope the question, and you do that by asking lead-up questions. Some lead-up questions, some of the good lead-up questions are to first ask what is the goal of why we want to design this product? Which industry are we designing it for? Is it a physical or digital product? Who are the target customers that we're doing? Which company am I designing it for? I've been in situations where like in my mind, I didn't want it, like in interviews where I'll ask somebody to design a product and they'll assume that I want it to be for Amazon, which is honestly a fair assumption, when really I just want them to design it for like anything. And so they're like complicating the question more than it has to be. And if they had just asked me, are we assuming that'll be for Amazon or for Facebook or for whatever, that would have made it a lot easier. The second thing that a lot of people forget to do is once you figure out which company or industry you're actually trying to design this product for, you have to make sure that you tie it to either the company strategy or where the industry is going. Only just designing a product without tying it to the products that the company already has or wherever the industry is. Sorry, could somebody go on mute? We could hear you. Clear your throat. Everybody please go on mute. It'll make it easier. And so it's really important that tying it back to the industry is done. So you'll find that when you're interviewing for like industry product, for like insurance product roles versus like tech product roles, it's really different. And even tech itself has really different, like you're not gonna go to a startup that has to do with, let's say, fashion and like apply the same sort of strategy than like an AI-based startup. It's super different. So taking the industry into account and where it's going and the company itself is something that you should do beforehand before actually starting to design anything. And then finally, and this is the part that I think is, unless if you're like an established product manager, it's not really the idea you want to go for. I think actually somebody's not on mute because we can hear some buzzing. Could you please go on mute? Thank you. So the interviewer can either select the product idea or they'll just ask you to select. Like usually they just ask me to select because I think it's like less burden on the interviewer. And then you start designing the features of the idea, how you would prioritize them, you know, like all the prioritization strategies that you used, how you would decide whether it's successful, what the MVP would look like, and then finally the next steps, like how you, what are other things that you would do, what are things that you would do if you had the perfect data. And so these are like, you know, some of the things. Some of the characteristics of a bad response, and I can tell you I have done all of them, and so like no embarrassment there, is when I ask a candidate, hey, design a product, and they immediately start pitching product ideas right off the bat. Like they don't even know what industry I'm asking for, or what. They'll just be like, oh, I've always had this idea. Another thing is that they will pitch an idea that has been part of like a previous ideathon or like a project, and it's like super obvious that they haven't even figured out what it is that I want as an interviewer, and they're just pitching something that they've already worked on and created. The third one is one of the steps, step number 2, which is failing to consider how the idea will fit with the current offerings. This is kind of like a advanced level way of responding to this question, and it really differentiates an okay-ish answer, like between a bad and a good, to like clearly good, is when you tie it back to the current offerings. This is a mistake that I used to always make, and I always used to forget this. And it was actually Stefan who showed me how to do this really well. And so we're gonna try to do the same for you. And then finally, you just kind of stop at the idea generation. And when the interviewer asks you to select, like, you know, what are you gonna, like, they ask you to just go down this idea that you had, you forget to like prioritize the features, what the success metrics will be, what the MVP will be, and then the next steps. Because then you're not really thinking end to end. You're just kind of like stopping at what the question that the interviewer asked you. So with that, we're gonna start it. I will shut this off and stop sharing my screen. And we are going to get started on what a good and bad response would look like. So Stefan is going to play the hiring manager. We're going to start off with a bad response. And Stefan's going to play the hiring manager here, and then I'm going to be the candidate. And it may get kind of awkward at times. And it's supposed to try to mirror the awkwardness that you feel in an interview when it's going poorly. But we're gonna try to limit it. So hopefully you enjoy it. And then after that, we're gonna stop and then go to what a good response looks like. Okay, go ahead, Stefan.
All right, cool. So Roshni, thanks for coming in today. My first question is, I'd like for you to design a house for me.
Yeah, okay, sure, yeah. Well, like, where's the house located? Where would it be located?
Let's say Seattle.
Seattle, okay. So I can tell you that in Seattle, a lot of people really love condos because they can afford it. It's like at a good price. And when they're looking for condos, one of the things that they really look for are like having large bedrooms with large windows and making sure that the number of bedrooms and bathrooms are the same. And so if I was going to design a house, I would make it a condo based off of what I know of the Seattle market. And it would be with like at least 2 bedrooms. I think that's the average that I know of.
Yeah. Is that it? Is that your final answer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Because that is how I would that's how I would approach it.
Okay. Sounds like you have an idea of building a house in Seattle. Just so you know, I have a dog. How would you accommodate that?
That's a good point. I didn't think of that. I guess so. Then what you're looking for is like a backyard. Like that is what you would want?
That would be a start.
Okay. Is there anything else that you want in a house?
I would say, a really nice kitchen.
Okay. So then I guess so then when you said that you want to design a house, did you mean for you or did you mean like for anybody?
Well, in this case, it would actually be for my my partner, but I'm not home that often, so it'd be mostly for my partner.
Oh, I see. Okay, so then so then my idea wouldn't work at all because you have a dog and like you have a partner and everything.
Yeah, it might not be a good fit with that current idea that you just gave me.
Okay, if that's the case, then I would build a house in like a neighborhood that allows for large yards, and uh, also would have a big kitchen and maybe like a multi-story kind of house, because if it's your partner and they would like to, like, you know, move around and stuff like that.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Interesting house. Okay.
Okay, well, that was like an intro to what a bad response looks like. Yeah, it is, but I guarantee it, like, you know,
It happens.
a lot of you probably have done it where you make the mistake of assuming that you know what the interviewer wants and you just start designing it. And like I did some of the things right, which was I knew the Seattle housing market really well. And so I based it off of what I knew and the research that I'd done. And usually this comes out in interviews where, like at least for Amazon, people will think they know everything about Amazon. And so they'll say, well, you know, like Amazon is missing this and this. And so like I would design a product like that. And I'll be like, yeah, but I didn't say you're working for Amazon. So like, why are you going down that path? And you can see at the end when I like came up with my response, like Stefan was like, okay. And that's also happened where interviewers will react that way, where they'll know that you're not at all ready for a product job. And so they'll basically just wait to like have the time run out on your interview. And finally, one of the other mistakes I made was I didn't talk about the next steps. I didn't talk about how I would determine whether Stefan would be happy. I mean, I made a lot of mistakes, but like the next steps was another one. I also didn't ask any lead up questions, just went in assuming it. And so with that, we'll show you what a good answer looks like. So we're going to start with a good answer. Okay, hey Stefan, thank you for being part of this interview today. The first question I'm going to ask you is, how can you design a house for me?
Sure. But before I, jump into the details of what this house could look like for you, I'm just curious to get a little bit of background information about the house that needs to be built, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Yeah.
So first thing I want to understand is this house for you specifically?
Good question, actually. I know I said that, can you design a house for me? But actually, it'll be a house for my boyfriend.
Okay. A house for your boyfriend. Is it just your boyfriend who'd be living in this house? Would you be visiting on occasion?
It would be just my boyfriend. Like I'd visit once in a while, but not enough for it to make a difference. My boyfriend also has a puppy.
Oh, okay.
Who's a large puppy. And so, yeah.
Okay. And would this be a primary residence? Would it be a vacation home? Would it be, and on top of that, if it's a primary residence, does your boyfriend travel a lot, or are they mostly coming back to the same home every night?
That's a great question. What would be more fun for you to design?
I'd say primary residence.
Okay,
personally.
Let's go with primary residence then.
Okay. Primary residence comes back to that space every night. Okay. So as you're interacting with your boyfriend, and I'm gonna assume you will probably know more about your boyfriend than I will.
Yeah.
But in their current place, do they rent? Do they currently own? Is it an apartment? Is it a home? Is it a townhome?
Let's just assume they're renting and that this is their first house, their first primary residence.
Okay. And they're moving from an apartment currently, or from a smaller space? Okay.
An apartment,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. What would you say is the one space in that apartment your boyfriend currently loves the most?
Probably the windows in a larger living room, because he smokes a lot, and so it's super important to have that so that the fire alarm doesn't go off.
Okay. So very good ventilation. Basically, likes the idea of going anywhere in the house and
Yeah,
being able
good
to do
point.
what they want to do. Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And for the puppy, you said it's a large puppy. So I'm assuming it's currently a puppy and it's going to be a bigger dog at some
No,
point.
it's now full grown. It's not
Full
gonna
grown?
be
Full
anymore.
grown?
Yeah.
Okay. So how does the dog get a lot of exercise? Is it local park? Is it in a common space in the condo, in the apartment building? How does the dog get exercise and get its needs fulfilled?
It's usually a local park,
Okay.
not usually in the apartment. But given all the information that you have now, could you give me a couple ideas of how you would design this house?
Yeah. So I guess first I just want to double check one last thing. I'm assuming we're designing this house in an urban setting based on the current setup with your boyfriend?
No, actually, would be next to the beach.
Next to the beach. Okay. All right. That helps explain a lot. All right. So, based on what I'm understanding, it's your boyfriend and the dog. And, one of the bigger pain points I'd say that's shared between the dog and your boyfriend is would like a lot of space and ventilation for when he's smoking, but also at the same time, space for the dog. The fact that we're by the beach helps eliminate that pain point of space and need for walking the dog. So that outdoor recreation space is available based on the real estate. So I want to focus on the house design for your boyfriend specifically and the need to have proper ventilation and smoking. So right now, I'm assuming when it's cold and rainy and wet, he has to have the windows open in his apartment. What would be really cool is I don't know if you've ever been to certain airports where they have a smoking room,
Hmm.
certain international airports, and they have vents that allow you to still smoke inside comfortably in a climate controlled environment, but still evacuate the smoke. That would be excellent to have in certain spaces, especially the living room
Hmm.
where your boyfriend likes to smoke. So in this case, when it's raining or it's snowing or it's cold, you don't have to expose all those elements in or accidentally trip the smoke alarm for your boyfriend
Got it.
when
But
he's
wouldn't it look
smoking.
weird to have a living room with a smoke room in it?
Well, no, it wouldn't be its own smoke room,
I
but
see. Okay.
it would have the ventilation to evacuate the smoke. So it wouldn't be a
Got
four
it.
walls and another four walls in a sense. So think of your house as a giant smoke room that allows you
Got it.
to enjoy smoking where you want to smoke
Okay.
without the need for exposing the elements or having to make certain accommodations to your life.
How much would this
Gotcha.
cost though? Like,
Oh. So if I were to use a proxy of the range fan, so the stove, the range, and you have the fan over it, it'd be a similar mechanism. And I'm assuming for the space by the beach and assuming a slightly bigger space because you're moving to a more spacious square footage. Each fan is probably around like $100 to install. In a certain square footage, you'd probably want about that size, about 4 fans. I'm extrapolating the area that a range covers to say a living room. So let's just say it's 4 fans worth. So that's about $100 a fan plus
hmm.
installation. It's about $400 a fan. And let's assume it's the same mechanism to evacuate the air as well. So you'd want a set of 4 fans in the living room. I'm assuming potentially another 2 in the bedroom based on the size comparison, because bedrooms technically run a little smaller than the living room. And actually, for that matter, would your boyfriend, in this case it's just your boyfriend and the dog and you visit occasionally, would a 1 bedroom make more sense or would a 2 bedroom make more sense in this case for your boyfriend's
Uh,
needs?
a two-bedroom would make more sense.
Okay.
We also have budgetary constraints and everything. But like I get where you're going with the smoke
Mhm.
room and everything. How would you decide whether, my boyfriend is happy with it? Like let's say you build this out.
Yeah, I'd say a big key metric from my understanding and personal experience, if I enjoy the space, I'm more likely to stay within the space for a longer period of time
Mm,
and not want to sell the home. So I'd want to measure length of ownership or time of ownership of the home before
okay.
possible turnover. Usually, the shorter the time is a better indication of the house is not meeting the needs, more than likely, and your boyfriend be looking for another space that better meets the needs. So that's one metric I'd look at. Another potential metric I'd want to explore with regard to whether or not your boyfriend was satisfied with the space is, you know, is your boyfriend spending a lot of time? How much time is your boyfriend spending doing the thing that he enjoys indoors within that space? So if it turns out that space isn't meeting the needs of smoking and he's spending more time outside the home smoking as opposed to inside, it means that the inside system hasn't met the needs of your boyfriend's need to smoke indoors. And that's clearly a failure on that design piece.
Got it. Okay. Okay, cool. Ideally, I would ask you more questions about next steps and everything, but like, you know, we're running short on time.
Yeah.
But this was an illustration of a good answer. I think somebody asked how many lead-up questions are too much, and you'll notice that at some point I did stop Stefan, and I was like, no, you know what? Based off the information you know already, you know, go ahead. There is such a thing as asking too many lead-up questions, but like Stefan didn't get there. As a hiring manager, if I find that it is getting to be too much, I'll do what I just did, which will just be like, just assume things and move on, because you don't want to get too prescriptive. And just so those who may not have done this before, so you know, designer product questions are usually like 30-minute questions. And so us trying to like, you know, put it into 5-10 minutes is difficult to do. But it kind of illustrated a lot of the stuff. Like Stefan asked me lead up questions. Like I think probably people would have assumed that I'm just looking for something in Seattle because I live in Seattle, when really I was looking for something next to the beach, and it was something for my boyfriend. Like all of those things would not have come out if he hadn't asked me those lead up questions. This answer didn't quite show the opportunity to show like, you know, the strategy and the company and all of that, because it's not designed to be that way. Which also kind of shows that these steps are good, but there kind of comes a time where you may have to skip some of the steps based off of what it is. Like one of the questions that I once got in an interview was, it was design a pizza delivery app for Mars. And it was like totally out there. And there's like no industry at all that like we can use it off of, and so I had to skip step 2 and just go on to like, well, okay, the pain points will likely be here. I had to ask a lot of lead up questions, and so, you know, those kinds of things can happen. But generally, when you are interviewing with most companies, looking at the strategy and all of that is super important. And then finally, another thing that Stefan did was he talked about the pain points, and the pain points which I explicitly told him, and then I started pushing him to think about the budgets, and then I asked him, well, okay, like how much would it cost? And he did like a high level estimation, and you'll find a lot of that happen. Like you'll know it's going well usually when the interview will start asking you more and more questions and will dive into what you're doing. If they usually take a step back, or they're like trying to understand what it is that you're saying or why you made that decision, then you're kind of going off on the wrong path and you've assumed something that you shouldn't. And so with that, I'll open the floor to questions that people may have. Based off of what I'm seeing in the chat, I think there's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so Nicole and Nidhi had similar kind of questions. So they are asking what happens when you don't know too much about the industry for the product you're designing. Would it be okay to tie it back to overall trends in the market? And Nidhi is asking on the similar lines, it's how do we answer if the interviewer asks to add a feature to an existing product that we have never heard of?
That's a great question. Stefan, would you like to take a stab at it first?
Yeah, I can take a stab. Honestly, you should never expect to go into the interview assuming you have all the knowledge about the questions. The idea is to understand how you think. For example, I got a question about designing an app for a chef, and I think it came down to being a smell app. Like the technology doesn't exist, but the important thing was, and after thinking about it, I was like, man, this was a ridiculous product that I made. But the point is, it focuses on the pain points and understanding what the high level needs are. Now, if it's about the company itself, probably a good idea to have some prep work ahead of time of, you know, how the company makes money. If it's something completely different, don't feel too overwhelmed. Feel free to ask questions and even put forth your own hypothesis on how revenue is generated. You may get corrected, or you may be, you know, told, yeah, go with that route. So don't stress over that, but be more focused on how you approach the question and the steps that you take to address the final answer.
That's a good response. I just like to add one thing that you could do to learn about a company's strategy is, you know, you can read shareholder reports. You can also talk to people who work there. You can also just look at like their all hands videos or the shareholder meetings that they hold, because usually that's where the strategy comes out. I found that a more impressive way to do this is to come up essentially just with a 5 forces framework for the company. And if you don't know what it is, you should definitely Google it. But what that 5 forces framework forces you to do is figure out where the company stands within the industry, taking both their customers, suppliers, competitors, all of that into account. And when you do that, that whole exercise forces you to look up things that you normally wouldn't and you wouldn't get from the shareholder report, and get insights into the company that other candidates may not have. And so that I found is it's a little bit of work. It takes about an hour to put together, but it's super helpful to figure out where the company is going and where it may go next. I've actually been in interviews where I've given ideas after putting together this 5 forces framework that like the VP that I was interviewing with didn't even consider. And he's like, oh, that's a really good idea. And so that only really came because I put in the work to like fill out this framework and think about where the company may go next, away from, you know, different from what their shareholder report already says.
Okay.
Anastasia, would you like to
so
ask the next one?
Priyanka has
Yeah,
a question. I have a different approach to ask for a goal in the beginning. Instead of asking the interviewer the goal, is it best to recommend goals based on your company knowledge, strategy, market trend, and then let the interviewer confirm if it's a fair goal?
I think that's a good strategy as well. Usually, you know, coming up with what a goal may be is one way to do it. But usually you're going to have like a period where you're going to ask questions anyway. And so usually just asking the interviewer for the goal is fine as well. There's both ways. It's just a personal style and a personal preference. I've found usually that I usually take the approach of going in between, where I'll say, okay, based off of what I know about, let's say, Facebook, I would think that your goal is to do this. Am I right? And kind of like what the person who asked the question said, and that makes it seem a little bit more humble. I've found some candidates will just definitively tell me that this is the goal, and that can come across as really rude. Like I had one candidate who said, oh, I think Amazon's goal should be this, so I'm just going to design it like this. Like they won't ask me for any input or anything, and I'll just sit there being like, okay, if you want to answer it wrong, that's fine with me. So you want to make sure that you strike that balance with humility when you're doing the actual interview.
Okay. So Khushbu has a question. Once a problem statement is identified, how do you generate creative ideas as features? Any strategies to practice?
Stefan, would you like to take this one?
Yeah. So the question is, if I got it correctly, is, you know, how do we generate or practice generating ideas for solving some of these designer product questions, correct?
Yes, creative ideas, yes.
Creative. So there's an in the moment example, but before the interview, what I like to do on just a day-to-day basis, especially as a PM or like I'm preparing to interview as a PM, is just kind of sit down and play the products I know very well and almost dissect them. So for example, I use Spotify a lot, and I spend a lot of time looking at the clients and the app and all the changes they go through and think through. Oh yeah, that was a creative idea. I see why they're doing it. Oh, I would have liked to do this, this, and this. And that kind of gets the brain to start training and looking at things differently. So when the interview comes and they say, hey, design something on a sniff test, your brain's already forced to expand on, all right, this is going to sound to the wall ridiculous, like this doesn't exist yet, but it could be A, B, or C. So it's part practice and part not limiting yourself to what's necessarily reality today, because what's not reality today could easily be reality tomorrow.
Okay, thanks. Swati is asking what happens when you ask really good questions up front, what Stefan did, and miss out on the critical details, and the interviewer probes you for things like Roshni brought up cost, budget criteria during the interview. How is that reflected on the interviewee?
I can take this one because I've made this mistake many times. I don't know if Stefan struggles with this, but I struggle with this where I sometimes forget to ask really obvious questions. And I think when I've tried it with Stephanie, I've actually missed these obvious questions. So I totally understand this concern. What I've found is, for me, what helps is taking a minute before asking any of the lead up questions and designing any of the products, and just sitting through what are all the things that are going to come up metrics wise. When I focus on the metrics that I would use to figure out if this is the right product, or how I would prioritize based off of this metric, like what metric I would use. If I just jot down the metrics at a high level, that helps me ask the correct lead up questions. I think it's an odder way to do it, but it's worked really well for me because I'm more of a metrics based person, more so than like being able to ask all the lead up questions. I think the person who asked this question had it right. Like Stefan, he didn't ask what is the budget. And so even Stefan, who's really good at it, right, like makes this mistake. It's not necessarily seen as bad when an interviewee forgets this. If they forget like something super obvious one time, it's fine. But if you like consistently are missing really obvious things, then you've done poorly. And I've definitely had that experience. And I know it's super nerve-wracking, but like putting down metrics or just writing out what answer you're about to give just at a high level helps to make sure you ask all the right questions.
And I just want to add, oftentimes, in a non-COVID era, you'd be doing this in person with a whiteboard. And I've had interviews where it's totally okay, where I said, oh, you know what? I totally forgot this one thing that I think is important. I just want to jot it down from earlier as well. And I think it's going to impact the answer. And the interview will be like, has responded to me in the past, like, oh, that's a really good thing. I'm glad you brought that up. It happens, right? People forget stuff. The point is, taking feedback from the interviewer, not being like, oh, I don't want to bother with that. Because sometimes they give you hints. And other times it's like recognizing when you forgot something and just calling it out. Like, hey, I forgot this detail. For example, when Roshni was mentioning when the bedroom came up, it's like, oh, I forgot to ask how many bedrooms you'd like to have. I forgot that's important. Let me ask you now. It can go on forever. But the point is recognizing when it's finally important or when you forget and when you want to bring it up, and just speaking it out to the interviewer that you are thinking about these things. That's the most important thing.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, we have two questions which are not exactly product design question. One is, what are common ways to keep up with where the industry is going, like ideally time boxed product, getting more product ideas, time boxed ideally to 30 minutes to 1 hour per week.
I can take some stab at this, and then Stefan, you can chime in. This is also something that I've struggled with because like I'm not a tech nerd, and so having to like read things all the time is not fun. But one thing that I've found that I also enjoy is reading Wired magazine. That magazine is phenomenal, and it like covers the industry and like what's happening in several different industries and tech in general really, really well. And I found that now that I've read that magazine more and more often, I'm able to connect ideas from different industries and like be even more creative in the ideas I come up with at work. More specifically, if you don't have the funds to get Wired or anything, I've also subscribed to Stratechery. I don't know how to say it right, but it's this this update that Ben Thompson, who used to work at Microsoft, Apple, all of that puts together. And his way of thinking and his view on things and where the industry is going is just really great. He has an actual like, you know, paid thing that you can get, which is also great. But he also has a free daily update that you can use. And on top of that, Quarks is also really great. It like gives you random bits of information about things, and sometimes it covers tech. But for me, generally, just reading things that I actually want to read and are fun has really helped. But maybe Stefan, you have other ways of doing this.
Oh no, similar boat. I read a lot, so the information is one. Wall Street Journal, New York Times. Just read a lot of information that's out there. A lot of it's more easily accessible than others, but yeah, to Roshni's point, just read what you enjoy reading, and you will learn.
You won't see the benefits in like the first week, but after a while, like you'll be sitting in a conversation and you'll be like, no, actually, this is how this thing works. And it's like, oh, like it starts like, you know, coming in. I think somebody also recommended TechCrunch. That's also really great. I personally never really, you know, wasn't a fan of it, but I know a lot of people like it. So
I read TechCrunch a lot when we were in grad school together, so that was my info page.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. I guess TechCrunch is great. I'm just a weirdo for not liking it. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I wanted to make sure that we kind of time boxed this to 30 minutes. We did go over a little bit, so maybe next time I'll just do 45 minutes. But super appreciate everyone joining. I plan to do this every month. Next month, it'll be estimation questions and how to approach estimation questions and what a good response and a bad response looks like. I'll upload this to YouTube as well. That way you have it. And thank you again for joining. And thank you, Stefan, for being the first friend.